Hey guys, welcome back once again to Flickers of Fear. This is my movie review series. So, remember last one I put up, because for a while I've been doing kind of newer international horror that was on Shudder, but then like last time I kind of took a break and did like an older Giallo movie, which also happened to be on Shudder. But this time around I thought I would go back to the newer international horror movie kick that I was on. So to that end, I decided to take a look at a film that had kind of piqued my interest, like when I saw it pop up on Shudder like a while back. But I hadn't pulled the trigger on it immediately. I just, ended up watching something else. But it so happened that a few days after I first saw it, like a friend actually recommended it to me just like out of the blue. So I thought kind of the stars were aligning for me to watch it, and I was kind of in the mood to watch this kind of thing. So, that's when I started watching it. So this movie is from 2024, and it's called The Devil's Bath. I am not even going to attempt to pronounce the German title, because this is a German-Austrian co-production. Now, this movie was actually written and directed by Veronika Franz and Severin Fiala, who are the team behind Goodnight Mommy from 2014, not the remake, the original one, and The Lodge from 2019, both of which I really enjoyed. Now, like those two movies, The Devil's Bath is very bleak and very slow-moving, but with kind of occasional bursts of, like, really disturbing shit. Now, for that reason, it obviously won't be for everyone. Yes, I know nothing is. But if you are into real grim, like, historical dramas with horror elements, like The Witch, or maybe, like, Hagazusa, or, I don't know, maybe even The Nightingale, you might be the intended audience for this film. I actually found it very powerful, very thought-provoking, and at times quite uncomfortable to watch. I'll be thinking about it for a long time, for sure. But I'm going to say if you're into more like traditional or faster-paced horror, you might want to skip it, because it's mainly a historical drama, but it has like horrific elements to it. So the movie is set in Austria in 1750. And the story is based on real events, and in particular, the practice of suicide by proxy. Now, this was something that I had never heard of before, and apparently the filmmakers were interested in this and wanted to kind of shed some light on a historical thing that apparently a lot of people don't know about. So, in German-speaking countries in the 17th and 18th centuries, it was considered a sin worse than murder to kill yourself. So individuals, most of them ended up being women, who were suffering from depression or otherwise wanting to end their lives for whatever reason, would instead commit murder and then immediately confess to it, knowing that they would be absolved by a priest before they were executed, which seems like a really fucked up way to go about things, but that's how it went. Now, these women, sadly, overwhelmingly killed children, because there was also a very widespread belief that children were pure, they were without sin. Therefore, killing them before they could sin would send their souls straight to heaven. So it's almost like you were doing the kids a favor, right? Okay. Like I said, it's fucked up, but, nobody ever accused religion of making any damn sense, did they? So our main protagonist here is Agnes. And she's played by, and I know I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Anya Plosh, I guess, is how there's a G at the end, but I don't know if you pronounce that or how you would pronounce it. Now, she's actually an experimental musician. She performs under the name Soap and Skin. And incidentally, she also composed the gorgeous, very haunting score for this film as well. Now, Agnes's character is largely based on a real Austrian peasant named Eva Lisfelnerin, I guess is how you pronounce her last name. And I have to say, like, Anya really crushes it here. She's fantastic in this and really heartbreaking in the role. It's a very, very sad movie. At the very beginning of the movie, though, before we even meet Agnes, there's this horrific opening sequence where there's a crying baby laying in a basket. And you just know, from the first second of the movie, like, and there's the baby in the basket, you're immediately like, there's dread. Like, you just know something bad's gonna happen. You know what I mean? It's just like this whole oppressive, like, thing. So this little boy comes and, like, tries to comfort the baby, but he just gets called away by his mom or whatever. So then we see this woman, who is presumably the baby's mother, like, pick up the baby and start walking through the woods with it, and the baby just, like, keeps crying. Now, eventually, the kid quiets down. But we know something pretty ominous is about to happen because the mom takes off her rosary and puts it around the baby's neck. And it's then revealed that the woman is standing at the edge of this enormous waterfall. And with very little fanfare, she just pitches the baby over the fucking waterfall. Yeah. And it just kind of hits all the rocks and shit on the way down. And then, very calmly, she proceeds to the nearest little castle or whatever, knocks on the door, and says, "I've committed a crime." Now, shortly after that, we see that she's been beheaded, and her headless body is still sitting on this stone chair thing, like on this altar that they made, like, out in the woods, this big, huge, like, altar. It's almost like a stage kind of thing with these big tree trunks and everything. And her head is, like, in this little cage next to her. There's, like, a little stand or whatever, and it has a cage, and her head is in there. And then, like, nailed to a tree nearby, there's a woodcut drawing which shows her, like, throwing the baby over the waterfall and then getting executed, like, at the bottom. So then we cut to our main character, Agnes, and she's weaving herself, like, a crown out of flowers and grass and berries and shit that she's kind of scrounged out of the woods. So it's her wedding day, we find out, and her mom and her brother pack up her dowry for this long walk to the next village where her husband-to-be, whose name is Wolf, lives. So there's this big, huge, like, joyous celebration, and even though Agnes doesn't really know anybody and kind of keeps herself sort of on the edges of the action, we're led to assume that, you know, she's just homesick or whatever. Like, she'll adjust to her new surroundings eventually, because this happens to a lot of women, you know what I mean? Now, at the end of the night, when her mother and brother are leaving, like, to go back to their village, her brother gives her, as a wedding gift, a severed finger. Which was actually taken, as we see, like, earlier, was taken from the headless woman in the woods, like, because a lot of her fingers and toes were gone. So you might think, yeah, that seems like a pretty weird-ass gift. Hey, happy wedding, here's a severed finger. But it turns out, this was a weird time, you guys. It turns out that these severed fingers and toes of an executed criminal are supposed to be a lucky charm that helps you conceive. How that little nugget of folklore came about, I have no idea, but here we are. Now, Wolf pulls Agnes away from the wedding at one point and very proudly shows her this big stone house that he's bought for them, which you'd think would be nice, but Agnes is worried because he took out such a big loan to pay for it that she's afraid that they'll never be able to pay it back, you know what I mean? She's also pretty bummed out that it's so far away from her family and so close to Wolf's mom's house. So even though she's kind of bummed out about this, I mean, she tries to settle into her new life or whatever. But right from the beginning, there are some more little niggling problems. For one thing, even though Agnes desperately wants a baby and expects, as you would back in that time, that her husband is going to knock her up, like, very soon, Wolf appears to have no interest at all in having sex with her. On their wedding night, as a matter of fact, he basically, you know, she's like takes her clothes off expecting, you know, sex, and he makes her turn on her side, like, away from him, and kind of puts his hand over so she can't see him. And then he either, at first I thought, did he just, like, jerk it behind her back? I think he was trying to get hard though, but he couldn't. And so, because he's back there working at it, you know what I mean? But he I guess he couldn't do it. So then he just, like, rolls over and goes to sleep, and she's just kind of laying there going, what the fuck was that all about? You know what I mean? It's implied, by the way. It's not super overt, but they do give a couple little hints here and there that Wolf is probably gay and has feelings for his best friend, whose name is Lens. But nobody ever mentions it. It's never revealed if those feelings were ever acted on or anything like that. It's just little subtle things here and there where you're led to assume that that's what his problem is. Now, Wolf's mom, whose name is Mother Ganglin, is also kind of a busybody. She's not mean exactly, but she's really stern, and she's not shy about telling Agnes, like, the right way to do things. She's over at their house, like, all the time. Like I said, the house is, like, right near her house. And she's basically like criticizing Agnes's cooking. She's rearranging Agnes's stuff like without permission, like shit like that. You know what I mean? Just irritating stuff. Now, Wolf insists that his mom really likes Agnes, but honestly, mom just seems like really exasperated with everything and clearly doesn't think Agnes can do anything right and kind of even blames her for not getting pregnant, even though it's her son who won't have sex with her, like because he's secretly into dudes. Now, most of the people in this village are, they're fishermen. And Agnes has to help out, just like everybody in the village does. And they kind of go through these horrible, like, muddy ponds, and they are, like, scooping carp out of there with, like, these big nets on sticks or whatever. And she tries really hard, but she's kind of hopeless at that, too, which makes her mother-in-law, like, even more annoyed with her. So, what with the failure to get pregnant, the constant belittling by the mother-in-law, and just kind of the overall sense of loneliness from like being an outsider and being far from her family and everybody she knows. And then there's also comes along later, like a later tragedy concerning a suicide of someone else that takes place in the village. Agnes starts to fall into like a kind of melancholy. The title of the movie, The Devil's Bath, by the way, that phrase is 18th century vernacular for depression is basically what that is. So that's what it means. Like if you're in the devil's bath, that means you're like depressed or whatever. So she starts just neglecting her chores at home. She doesn't really bother to care for their animals, like they have goats and chickens and stuff, and she doesn't cook or anything. And she just starts wandering around in the woods at all hours. And she starts to become particularly obsessed with the altar, which has the headless woman who threw her baby over the waterfall. Now, to his credit, Wolf, who's actually portrayed as a really decent guy that genuinely cares for Agnes and wants to get her help. Like, obviously he's not attracted to her, but he does actually seem to care a lot for her and love her. He tries everything he can to kind of snap her out of it, but the situation just seems to be getting worse and worse. And at one point, like, Agnes even attempts to, like, run back home to live with her family, and, like, Wolf has to go, like, drag her back, you know what I mean? Because she's, like, screaming and she doesn't want to go back. Now, because Agnes has become so fascinated by the dead woman in the woods, you just know that something along similar lines is going to go down. And so it's kind of like watching a car crash in slow motion. Like, you know that it's going to be bad when it happens, but you can't really do anything to stop it. So, as I said, this movie is a pretty slow burn, so know that going in. I didn't have an issue with the pacing at all. It's beautiful to look at, and there's just such a sense of dread that's just like permeating the whole atmosphere of the movie. It just really kept me kind of riveted through the entire 2-hour runtime. Your mileage may vary on that, of course, but I was just fascinated by it. I was just like, because I knew something bad was going to happen, and you were just like waiting for that shoe to drop, you know what I mean? The acting is fantastic, and all the period details are like really, really accurate, so it just kind of like immerses you into this world. One thing I particularly liked about this movie was that the way Wolf and his mother-in-law and the villagers were portrayed as generally good people. I mean, at least in the context of the era. They weren't like abusive monsters that drove Agnes to madness, in other words. Like, it would have been easy to make them like villains, to explain like why she went the way she went, you know what I mean? But they didn't do that. Like, yes, mom was a huge pain in the ass. Wolf wouldn't fuck her and like give her a baby, and some of the townsfolk were like irritated that she couldn't like get her shit together, like with the fishing and everything. But nobody beat her up or called her a witch or tried to exorcise her or anything like that. They kind of understood. They were just kind of like, you know, we really need to get a snapper out of this. Like, Wolf and his mom actually sent her to like a barber, sort of like a doctor in those days, and kind of attempted to get her better, but her illness was just too severe. And honestly, like, what the barber did was pretty much worse than useless, but they didn't know any better, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like interesting to see a movie like this, that kind of explores how mental illness, depression, was not much understood at the time. Like, they were aware of it, but they didn't really know what caused it, you know what I mean? And it's also interesting to see one set during this era where the depressed person is actually treated with some measure of compassion instead of just being locked in a cell or, you know, like I said, accused of witchcraft or left in the wilderness to die or something like that. You know, don't get me wrong, these were still tragically backwards people, but they weren't complete savages. Like I said, they were aware of people going that way, people being depressed. They just didn't know what caused it and how to fix it. Now, I would hesitate to call The Devil's Bath a straight horror movie, but it is horrific for sure. And it's really sad, and it's pretty disturbing to be like, it's pretty, there's a lot of beheadings and that kind of stuff in there too. So it's not, there's gore, so I would call it a horror movie in that regard. And the fact that it's based on a true story just kind of makes the whole thing even more distressing, like, to watch, you know what I mean? Because it's really kind of a bummer. Like, it's not for all tastes, like I said, but if you kind of are into, like, somber historical dramas, about, like, pretty dark periods of history that don't really, that don't get a lot of traction or that a lot of people don't really know about, then you might really dig this. So, like I said, it's on Shudder, so check it out and tell me what you thought about it. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. Thank you very much for watching. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.